Start. So hello everyone and welcome to our session, C5 about migrant communities and urbanization. I am Mais Jafari and I am a city planner and I work at the City of Dortmund as a city planner and project coordinator and at the TU Dortmund University as an assistant professor. And I would like to welcome the presenters as well in our session. So we were supposed to have 4 presenters, but unfortunately for some reasons, technical reasons mainly, we will have just 2 presenters. And I'd like to welcome Yiling Glenn from the University of Hong Kong, and she will give us a presentation about Remittance House in China, the journey of migrant laborers to manufacture hope. And our second presenter is Chi Kin Lai from the National Cheng Kung University. And he will give us a presentation about retracing footsteps itinerant hawkers in Singapore. And I would like to give some information just about the organization of this session. So we normally we would have 20 minutes for each presenter, but since 2 presentations have been canceled, so we will give more time for the presenters. So take your time to present between 20 and 40 minutes for your presentations. And after the presentation, we will have questions and answer session after each presentation. So, and feel free either to write your questions in the chat box or just ask directly, but I encourage you to ask directly since we are not many people in the session today, and yeah, we can do this in a more easy way. So, okay. So this is the general structure of the session, and we will start with the presentations we have today. The first presenter we will have is Lin Yiling, and Lin Yiling is a PhD candidate from the Division of Landscape Architecture, University of Hong Kong. Her interests are migration and housing investment, space and inequality, and rural-urban changing landscape. Her research has been published in Chinese Sociological Review, Travailler, and Mainland Affairs Council in Taiwan. Yiling is currently working on remittance building in southern rural China, examining how migrant workers make these build forms happen within an institutionally rural-urban divided, culturally and economically unequal society. So Yiling presentation, just as I mentioned, will be about Remittance House in China, the journey of migrant laborers to manufacture hope. So the floor of you is yours, and we look forward to listening to your presentation.
Thank you. Okay, so really happy to have me here. So thank you so much. Now I'm going to share my screen.
Mm-hmm.
Can you see it clearly?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Okay, so okay, hi everyone. So once again, really thank you for having me here in this session. I'm delighted to share with you my ongoing project, Remittance Houses in China. The content of today's presentation is one part of my dissertation. Since the session is about migrant communities and urbanization, I'll introduce the historical background of remittance houses, its contemporary context in China, and the relations to urbanization. Your comments, constructive feedbacks, and potential collaborations are really welcome. Okay, so now I'm going to introduce the historical background of the remittance houses. Let me explain why I start up this project. I studied the lives of Foxconn factory workers in Shenzhen years ago. I noticed that some workers would get themselves part-time jobs after work. When I asked them why they didn't take a good rest and still do handiworks after 10 or 12 or even 14 hours in the factory, they said. Then I can have more money to remit to family in my hometown. After that, I paid attention to the houses on my way to rural areas. Some of the houses look different from traditional one-story brick houses, and some were decorated in Western style materials, like you can see in the image, the pillar. Therefore, I began to explore the nexus of migrant laborers and their houses. Scholars have investigated the study of overseas Chinese, their remittance, and the development of hometowns, in Chinese called qiaoxiang. The development can be divided into three periods, 1850 to 1900. This is a developing period of remittance houses, but at that time, actually, they don't call it. They just think this is the houses. And the second period, 1900 to 1937, is a booming period of remittance houses. And the third period, since 1937, is a receding period. Before 1870s, farmers and fishermen, mostly from Guangdong province, in impoverished area, went to the United States, Canada, Southeast Asia, etc. to do hard work. At that time, they were called Huagong. These first generation immigrants suffered from debt and barely had savings to remit to hometowns to build houses. Things got better after the 1870s. A few overseas Chinese workers became rich and returned home to build houses. Expecting to have the honorary value of being a gentry, they bought official government posts and built traditional Chinese mansions to represent glorious homecoming. In the late 19th century, communities of overseas Chinese and their kinship family were designed and established by themselves, and single family houses were more universal than before, as you can see from the image I showed you. To show their prestige, the returned overseas Chinese transplanted the Western style architectural facade and decorated bazaars to their hometowns. After World War I, while the overseas remittance and the construction of Western-style buildings reached the heyday, defensive architecture such as Diaolo, multi-story watchtowers, emerged at the same time to protect prosperous overseas Chinese from burglars. After World War II, some overseas Chinese joined the nationality of the country of residence, and the connection with the country of origin, here means China, has gradually weakened. The remittance has thus dwindled. The outbreak of Cultural Revolution in 1966 made the Qiao, overseas Chinese, a sensitive topic, and to some extent ceased the development of remittance architecture. Overall, the house owned by overseas Chinese have several characteristics. Overseas Chinese built the houses. They built with transnational capitals. The clan with same family names collectively found and built this area. So in the very beginning, they called this as over Chinese settlement rather than remittance houses, and usually located in coastal areas. And different folks built their own style of house, such as house style, actually in Chinese called Cuo style, and Western style, and Hakka enclosed house, depends on their different focal groups. And now let's look at the contemporary contexts. As I said in the beginning, it is common to see these houses on your way to rural areas. It is burgeoning. Most of the houses belong to rural migrant workers. Scholars, unfortunately, have not paid sufficient attention to the following development of remittance houses in China after 1966, particularly special practices operated by domestic rural to urban migrant workers who flock into cities due to urbanization and their remittance. Then, how do we better understand these rural remittance houses? Why do they build a house in rural hometown while spending almost the whole year working and living in cities? To figure out if the phenomena relates to urbanization, I parse out the global context and domestic contexts. This slide focuses on the global context. I selected the data of gross domestic product, GDP, and purchasing power parity, PPP, collected by the University of Groningen. GDP is seen as an important indicator of a country's economic situation. PPP is an indicator of a country's purchasing power. From the chart I made, you can clearly see that China's curve has started to increase significantly in around 2000. Because of participating in WTO in 2001, China integrates into the world's multilateral trading system. Its economy takes off and plays a crucial role in the global economy. Also, it facilitates the process of urbanization. Now, this slide, I narrowed down my lens from a broader picture to China context, to domestic rural household fixed asset investment. Since economic reforms, China has gradually changed from planned economy to socialist market economy. Special economic zones and coastal open cities make economy take off quickly. The urban-rural binary structure and the lucrative interest from coastal cities have attracted massive peasants to migrate to urbanizing cities, constituting a great labor force. It is worthy to note that the number of migrant workers has a positive correlation to that of rural fixed assets and building construction after the economic reform. The data shows that both the investment in residential buildings, the orange bar, and the total investment in fixed assets and building construction, the blue bar, have tremendously grown. This is related to a national plan, construction of new socialist countryside. In 2012, urbanization is highlighted by Li Keqiang as the greatest potential for domestic demand. New urbanization plan was issued in 2013. It seems to me that migrant workers have been affected by the top-down plans. In addition to statistics, I'd like to hear voices from migrant workers to know what is the logic that they decide where to settle down. Although how is this related to the architectural forms? So to answer this question, I interviewed, inside participatory observed, and studied the special transit maps via Google Earth and archival archives. This is an overview map showing migrant workers' rural home villages and works. I start from the Taiwanese invested keyboard factory in Dongguan because I am actually from Taiwan and I have networks, Taiwanese businessmen. They are running the business here, so it's easier for me to get into connect with them. So I try to gain the trust from the gatekeepers and get the entrance. And this is just want to show you how I approach to, actually it's not like so easy to approach to the migrant workers, but I use some ways like to interview them. This is where I mostly stayed in the factory for 2 months and did my interview in Dongguan, this one. And this is the survey. So the first selected case, May, female in her 30s, married. Her husband also works in Dongguan. They have a son who is studying in primary school. May has been working in this factory for more than 10 years. She has been promoted from a factory worker to the human resource leader. She bought an apartment in Yunnan County. The apartment is still on loan. Then I tried to study the location, her hometown, to try to figure out the connection. So May's hometown is in Tuoguchun, located in Yunnan province. What kind of place is Tuoguchun? As you can see from the bullet list, there are 1,100 or so households, poor infrastructure, even drinking tap water and watching cable TV are difficult. Phone owners are few. May said that people would never want to go there unless they have errands. She said, quote, I rarely go home and return once every 2 years, quote. She said, you must have no idea about 1,600 kilometer distance. You spend a whole day sitting in a car. I was even standing in a cage to cross over Jingsha River before, quote. The government redefined Maozu to a town in 2012. Also, the place is planned to be an ecological civilized town in Yunnan in 2017. However, the transportation facilities are still lagging behind. Education and medical conditions are lacking. The village depends on farming and no village collective economy here. It is not hard to imagine that a quarter of the village population are working outside the village. As you can see from the images, actually there are not huge differences between 2012 and very recent years. So this is I wrote some quotes from May. May sets out with hope. From the interview, you can realize that she worked very hard and saved money hard. Because of time limit, now we don't have time limitation. I can read some of the paragraphs, then you will see the emotions and more clearly. Okay. I wanted to go out and make money outside. I was always thinking that I'm going out to make a lot of money and I'll buy you a house. You here refers to her mom. I'll buy you a house in the future. After coming out, I found that I didn't have time to spend money. So I saved my money. When going out during the new year, I'm generous to the kids and the elderly. The money you earned so hard and the home trip took all your savings. And she also said, every day I worked overtime in the factory plant, can do packaging for 3 to 4 more hours. I only buy necessities and rarely go out, not even to the supermarket. I spend only dozens of renminbi a month. I earn 3 to 4,000 a month, 3 to 4,000 a year. It is normal to spend 20,000 when you go home. So I can't go home frequently. I have a kid. Kid stuff are so expensive. If the child is not with you, you feel aggrieved. So when I try hard to go back, whatever the child asks, I will satisfy him most of the time. This is the May's rural home village. In the very beginning, she tried to renovate the old house when she has the poor household subsidy. She said, there's no way to build it at once. I'm sorry. I built a part of it, put it there if no money. and wait until I have money to renovate. Considering her parents, she decided to buy an apartment for them in Yunnan County. She said, I decided to buy an apartment with a loan, good for kids to school, good for my mom to buy groceries and go to hospital. Okay, I'll do the case analysis in the end. So now I'm going to share with you my second case. So here is the second case, Song's case. Song, male in his 50s, married. His wife works in Dongguan as well. They have an adult son who is now living in the village with his parents, Song's parents. Like May, Song has been working in this factory for more than 10 years. He is the cook in the factory. Before leaving for Dongguan, he worked as a construction foreman with his father. They were the construction team in the village. He self-constructed his house in the village. Song's hometown is in Linjiang, very close to Chongqing. He said that Linjiang was a small area, but after several time township system adjustment, Linjiang now is the largest town in Kaizhou district. He said it proudly. Linjiang occupies an important position in the region's economic and social development and overall urban-rural development strategy. It has become the preferred town for various pilot demonstrations. In 2005, Linjiang was selected as one of the key towns in China. Several national policies were issued to support the development, such as Western Development Strategy, overall urban-rural development, and a series of policies that support agriculture and benefit farmers. There is a principle of construction of new socialist countryside. It said the tidy village is a window showing the new look of the countryside and an invisible requirement for achieving harmonious development between man and environment. This is a principle in the 2005 plan construction of new socialist countryside. The construction of Song's house, he said, was actually benefit from the plan. This image shows you Song's houses. The left one is his old house, and the right one is his new house. So the national plan to construct a new socialist countryside develops his hometown. Because the government invests money on it, it is developing. The place is developing and the place is not so remoted from Chongqing. Besides, Song is a skilled foreman. Inside building a house is smart and cost-saving, quote to his words. The government subsidized the construction, and he knows where to buy good and cheap architectural materials. He said, the house, I built that house for 2.5 years with my father. 2 people, no hiring, construction team he meant. The house was built for my brother and my parents, very wide. People to the market crossed the road in front of my house, saying that this house was so beautiful. My neighbor saw the house, asked us to renovate for him. I called our workers directly. The next is about how he was fined by the government because he tried to use the advantage of the plan to like expand the house. So he was fined, but doesn't matter. Okay, so now Futing is my second field site to conduct the interview. So I interview here. So this is the same. I show you where I do the interview and how I get the access to the migrant workers and who is the gatekeeper. This is the third selected case, Bear. Bear, male in his 30s, married. He and his newlywed wife has a daughter studying in elementary school. He has been working in this factory as a driver for half a year. His house is in the county. Bear's hometown is in Yaojingcun, Honglu Town, Fujian. Yaojingcun is located in Honglu Township. In 1984, Honglu became a town. In 2005, its administrative district category was changed to street. Street is a bigger level in the place. It is clear that the area is well developed. Honglu Street is also home to the central and southern area of the National Rongqiao Economic and Technological Development Zone. There are nearly 70 macro units directly under the jurisdiction of the city. It is a key industrial satellite town and famous overseas Chinese town on the Fuxia Industrial Corridor. You can see from the changing maps of Google Earth that the village has gradually developed due to domestic capital injection, and the buildings have also increased significantly. Okay, so this is also the comparison. The tallest, can you see the arrow? The tallest building behind this old one is Bear's new houses. So this is the original one. This is actually the common area. They are still actually sharing, but this is more like a common area and common buildings for everyone to use. When I once having a I was not really interviewing, but I was chatting with Bear and his family. There are a lot of aunties. They are aunties, and the mom are dancing here. Okay, old ladies. Okay, so okay, I'll say some quotes from him. Sorry. People in Fuqing usually work overseas to make money. My mom married in Taiwan, so I went there with her. I did everything: the hotel waiter, the bartender, the underground tunnel cleaner. I did everything. You know, the worst thing for a man is to keep face. You don't make much money, but as long as your friends call, you go out with them without thinking. Money gone. I also paid a little money to build this house. The procedure was run by my mother and my sister. Now the property is under my mother's name, but son will eventually have the house. I use the three selected case studies to illustrate that how the location, developing status, and one's capitals, including financial capitals and social capitals, affect whether migrant workers build or rebuild houses in their hometowns and how they do it. Three typologies can be found. The first one, home village, is in the rural. For this kind of typology, migrant workers prefer to buy a commodity housing in a nearby town because it is easier for them to live their lives, like the medication, education. So like May, she is more self-reliant and do not have much family support. Especially she is a married woman, means she can no longer, according to the Chinese informal law or informal law, she can no longer inherit the house. So she is more like self-reliance, and she want to do her best to take care of her parents. So in this way, usually she will not build or to renovate the house in the origin home village. She will try to get a commodity housing, a cheaper one, and people have already built for her in a nearby town. The second type of typology, home village, is in urban-rural intersection. Migrant workers, for this type of typology, migrant workers is possible to self-construct or to rebuild the house. Like Son, he is skilled and has family network to support it. He knows how to build a house, and somebody can help. The third type of typology is the home village as in urban fringe. For this type of typology, migrant workers usually do inside rebuilding. Like Bear, he is full of family capitals and not difficult to find a job in the city. In addition, this project also found that the house owned by rural migrant workers can be found several characteristics which is different from remittance houses owned by overseas Chinese. They are migrant workers built houses with inter-provincial capitals. One family co-built the house and live together until the son gets married, usually located in inland areas. Although sometimes Western style is slightly mixed in buildings, they use simple materials to build and decorate the house. So through this presentation, I aim to show you the neglected remittance house of migrant workers. Despite they are living in a precarious life, especially when suffering from barrier of the hukou system, they are full of agency in the era of urbanization. Despite the architectural forms are not grandest, these remittance houses embodied their suffer, hope, and energy. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It was indeed it's interesting, and you took us through the journey of their feelings, memories, and how they transformed it into, at least in the physical form of building their houses. So as I mentioned, we will have the question and answer session now, since we have enough time. So are there questions from the participants? Okay. Yeah, maybe I can start with one question. So you just mentioned the typologies. There are the urban-rural intersections, urban fringe, and the rural houses. And into like comparing to the Chinese scale of town, like of town sizes, do you anticipate, or do you believe that these houses can form an urban agglomeration at one point, or will they remain scattered and at the periphery of bigger cities, or this will be that they will form a kind of a new contemporary polycentric agglomeration?
According to the national policies, I believe the government is trying to re-centralized, try to try to move populations out of these bigger cities, especially in coastal cities. So I think they are trying, the government is actually trying to moving people to their original hometown. Although we do not, if this is very successful yet, because according to the policy, it should be, because people, the coastal cities, actually, they have strict policies to limit people staying in cities. So maybe you can know from the news that they are expel the low-end population from Beijing, and actually other big cities, they are trying to limit or design some schemes to like to not so barred, but like to do not let them stay, or just stay for living. You are allowed to work here for a while, but you are not able to like stay here for a longer time, because this is the residential household system, the limitation of it. So I think if in the end, eventually, as far as what I did, some of them are actually real will build the house in their rural home village, because actually they don't have other choices, because when they get old, they have to like leave the cities, although some of them will choose to stay if they have their children's in the city, they can. But if they don't have the sons or daughters, actually when they don't have the ability to earn money, they are actually forced to go back to their home villages. So yeah, so in some way, people are they will go back to the home villages. But if you're going to say this cities is going to grow into or to aggregate it to a certain level of city scales, I think it still takes time. But I believe the government is doing this way according to their year plans.
Thank you. I see that we have a question from Adnia, so you can ask your question, please.
Hi, very interesting project. Thank you for sharing with us. I'm originally from Indonesia, and we also see a similar phenomenon, whereas overseas workers use their remittance money to build homes for their families back home. My question is, in China, has this phenomenon created any separation or segregation within the hometowns of these overseas workers, either spatially or community-wise, or do you think they are pretty well integrated at this point with the rest of the community or the other more local traditional houses in the area? Thank you.
A lot of scholars they are doing the Chenzhongchun, the village in the cities. Their focus is on the migrant workers living and working in the cities, their accommodations. So actually, if you're referred to their accommodation in the cities, yes, it is. It is actually resulted in to some extent a segregation, I think. But the government is trying to integrate the migrant workers and the citizens. So my points, my positions, my stance is like, if the institutional barrier, the Foucault system doesn't change, I think the integration has its limitation. So for the special locations, you can see it very obviously. The where they live is actually not so decent, and they are actually, because I got an experience interviewing with factory workers, Foxconn factory workers, and they are actually kind of limited in, not really, but you will know that because of your economics data. Actually, you are not so possible to go into the city center to do a lot of things. You actually kind of like go around or to have your life just in this village, because it is affordable for the status. So I would say that yes, it is. Yeah, it is. Special segregation is already forming, and yeah, I hope this can be improved.
Um,
Yeah.
What about in the hometowns itself where the remittance houses are built? Do you find that this bigger, more modern houses that they tend to be built like close to one another, or are they kind of inserted within the more traditional local existing homes?
It's a good question. I think one of the observations is that I think the differences between the remittance houses of the Chinese funded or invested by this overseas Chinese, I think the very big differences is actually migrant workers remittance houses is um, not not good enough, or not sufficient enough to be a settlement, because although we know there are a lot of peasants or migrant workers in China, but actually they are all out to the cities, and they are actually the empty houses in rural areas. So I don't think they will have like, yeah, there might be like envies or sayings or rumors like I want to go out like them, I want to build a house like them, and maybe it will have an effect to like influence your neighbors. But actually a lot of time the houses are empty, and so yeah.
Mhm.
I don't know if I answer your question.
No, that was great. Thank you. Thanks for the
Okay.
answer.
Thank you. We have two questions, one from CK and one from Nizar. Maybe you can take first the question from Nizar.
Wei Ling, I wanted to ask you actually a number of questions, but the first maybe is I wanted to know, where are you exactly in this research? Is this like a finished paper? Is this a finished dissertation? Is this likely to be a book? And I ask that because the field of the remittance house is actually quite large. And I'm trying to build on both the question that Mais and the question that Adia asked you. So where are you exactly in this research? Is it completely finished? Is it a dissertation? What is it?
It is a dissertation, and I'm actually going to finish, but this is not a short version of my dissertation. It is actually because I participated, I designed the whole content for this
event.
this session. Yeah.
Yes, no, I understand that. I understand that. So let me ask you this question then. Do you know what the origin of the term is?
I know.
Since this is you know, who's the first person to ever use the term remittance house?
Sarah Lynn Lopez. Perhaps yes. She is your student.
She is my student, yes. So I'm asking this question because, again, building on the two you know, previous questions, it appears to me that if you look at it from that very specific perspective, the phenomena is such an international phenomena, and it has so many different manifestations. So, for example, there's the phenomena of migrant workers who work in cities, and basically they send money back home in the villages. And that is very different from the phenomena of expatriates, people who live in countries, for example, like Moroccans in France, or the Mexicans in California, who send things back home, and they're not necessarily building in rural areas, but in urban areas. And there are fundamental differences between these different groups. And I think one of the things that could come out of your research is, in a sense, the uniqueness of the group that you're dealing with. So you have two tracks, the way I see it. One track is what makes that a remittance house in the Sarah Lopez definition, but also in the general definition of the remittance house that exists in many other parts of the world. And what makes the case of this particular group of people that you're looking at so fundamentally different. So for example, one of the things that I've noticed is when I look at the architecture of what your folks have built as a remittance house is very different, for example, from her examples. It's actually, for me, much more similar to the kind of architecture that is built in rural areas in places like Morocco and Egypt, by workers who left their countries and went to places like Saudi Arabia and France and got influenced by the architecture of opulence that they saw there and tried to replicate it. So I see that much more in common, if you will. And I think this is an angle that you definitely owe to yourself, at least, to be able to explore. It's very, very interesting work. And I think, as I said, its uniqueness is something that should be emphasized as much as its similarity with other trends going on around the world.
Mm-hmm.
So this is just a comment. It's not really a question. It's much.
Thank you. I actually, but can I give feedback?
Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Of course you can.
Actually, I thought about what you said before, and I'm also thinking about, because a lot of people are actually giving me the comments on the like the architectural influences. They want me to focus more on like what is the difference about this using architectural materials and the materiality. And I think this is I'm also interested in it, but what I actually did efforts on this, but I found that maybe I still need to work on it, but I found that this migrant workers are not so not as wealthy as overseas Chinese. So I think in this, for me, I think this is still in the very beginning period of, if I see it from a more broader scope to see this remittance houses, because I cannot still see if they have already been more healthy migrant workers, maybe they can do some more work on the buildings. So I can see like more Western style or something like this. But for now, I think as this for the migrant workers I focus on, they are actually the most disadvantaged people. So actually they are trying so hard to survive, and if they can even finish the house, they are doing their best. So yeah, but I'll pay attention to the materials.
I understand. I know we have one more question before we move to the next speaker, so I'll defer. Nice.
Yeah, thank you. We actually have 10 minutes still, because as I mentioned, we have just 2 speakers in this session, and we making it 1 hour each speaker. So we still have 10 minutes for a question. And I see now that we have a question from CK, so please.
Thank you, Ling, for the interesting paper. My question is also related to what Nazar has mentioned. You mentioned there were sort of overseas Chinese, right, who had already started this process of creating the remittance houses. I'm particularly interested in the choice of architecture, right, as everybody is, for the particular examples, right? Because there is are there overseas Chinese, prior overseas Chinese remittance houses in those places, or are there remittance houses built by others? So what is the reference point, or what is the type of reference architecture for their own decision to build, right? Whether these were also influenced by earlier remittance houses, or from overseas, submitted by the overseas Chinese, or built by the overseas Chinese, or those that are already existing in the town or in the countryside. So so in that sense, there might have been reference points. I mean, it may not be similar to, or it could be similar to those in Egypt or Morocco, but I think there could also be reference points that are closer to where they built their houses. And since you're interviewing them, right, you could also check, with them if what those kinds of references could be.
Thank you for the question. I actually asked them about how they because my hypothesis is actually the same with your consideration. I think maybe they are influenced by some architects or by some like the architects. After all, Diallo is so famous, right? And the mansion is so grandiose. So maybe they might want to imitate or so. But I asked them how or why do you choose this type of like facade or the door or the window? They said that actually we can download everywhere from WeChat to see the plans, the floor plans. So they just download it. Sometimes they don't even bother to ask about this. They just say, I have the budget of like to maybe 20,000 or so. So this is my budget. I give this budget to the foreman or to the construction team, the leader of the construction team, so that you can design something for me. Of course they will ask about how many rooms you're going to have, or do you want like a backyard or something else. But after all, they don't actually think about the decorations that so much. But as to the decoration, I think they pay more attention on like interior decorations, because interior decorations are more flexible and they can like replace it easily. And I think this is more affordable for them to choose and to have their own choices on so-called architectural materials or something. But yes, so I hope I answered this question.
Thank you. So yeah, I want just to add to what Nizar mentioned about like it's a broad topic, and I see there are, especially that you mentioned in your presentation that you're doing bottom-up analysis, and for me this could be either social, like from the first very personal experience, the bitterness of gathering this money for building these houses, and the socioeconomic stratification happening in this village, and of course at the planning level, where if you to go to that dimension, what does it mean at the house, at the architectural level, and then the at the city, what kind, where it at the special dimension of this. So I think this is, maybe it's important for you to understand what to focus on, whether it's the social aspects or the planning aspects and the architectural aspects. And one last question, you mentioned that in one of the examples, I think in the first exam, the second example, that the person you interviewed built the house with his father, and it took him 2.5 years. And my question is there a kind of building regulations where you get to have you have to get a license for the house, or what kind of is it informal building, like settlements, these villages?
You are asking actually the key question. I actually asked about, do you get a license like an architect? And he said, who cares about it? I know how to build, and I learned from my father. And I said, so is your father an architect? He says he knows how to build a house. So we build it. So yeah, so it's more like if you check the news from I think it's not so hard to get it, because I can sometimes I googled the architectural teams in Chinese news. You can easily see sometimes some problems happens in the buildings, especially in rural areas. Actually, there is a very huge news happened. There is a hotel in, I forget the province, the place, but the buildings collapsed because their building technologies and are not, and the materials are not so good and well. So yeah,
Yeah.
things happened.
Okay, thank you. So we have the last 5 minutes, and we have the last question from Muntira. So please ask your question.
Hi, Yiling, thanks very much for your paper. I came a little bit late, but I came just in time to see your picture of the Diaolo. Actually, my father's ancestral hometown is Kaiping. So it was
cool.
like a nice welcome to your paper. But I just want to contrast between the Diaolo and the subsequent remittance houses that you talked about. For the most part, these remittance houses that you focused on are domestic migrants, right? I mean, moving from the hinterland to the coastal areas, versus the Diaolo that are migrants who are going particularly to like the west coast of America and working on the railways and so forth. But ironically, the Diaolo form, as has been remarked when it was, conferred World Heritage status, is a fusion architecture between so-called the West and so-called the East, but with elements of like the roofscape showing like so-called Indo-Saracenic architecture that was inspired maybe by things that are coming out of India and so forth, because the migrants would have experienced these through postcards when they were traveling via Hong Kong and other ports of call. So there is an element of, despite the fact that they went all the way overseas, the ultimate result was a mix of local building traditions and these kind of fantastical borrowed influences from outside, versus the modern day remittance houses are just like small versions of the mansions that you would see, right, in, I don't know, some suburban Houston suburb or something, like some imagined version of what a Western suburban house would be like. I wonder if you have anything to remark upon that, even though that they're circulating entirely within China, but obviously they're responding to a globalized understanding of what it means to be middle class and to live in a middle class house.
Actually, I didn't pay a lot of attention on this kind of house you mentioned, because but I noticed about the rural gentrification. I don't know if it refers the overlapping aspects to what you mentioned. I think if I think about the phenomena or the influence of globalization in rural areas, I might think of the gentrification, because according to the studies or the papers I read, I know that there are some people, they really like the rural areas and the aura, so they migrant to they actually are urbanists, but they migrate to the rural areas to enjoy the life there. So after a period of time, and of course it is accompanied by the governmental fundings and supports, the villagers, they help together to build the house, to not really build, I mean to create the house into a more gentrified place. So yeah, but I haven't noticed about like the like a Grant mentioned in the rural areas you said. So yeah, perhaps I didn't pay attention to that.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Do you have anything to add, Yiling?
No,
Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you for feedbacks and comments. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation, and thanks all for the discussion. And now we will come to the last presentation in our session, given by Chi Kian Lai. And Chi Kian Lai is an architectural and urban historian and also a registered architect in Singapore. He graduated from the National University of Singapore with a Master in Architecture and a PhD in History of Architecture and Urban Design from the University of California, Berkeley. His publications include Building Merdeka, Independence Architecture in Kuala Lumpur, in 2007, and Building Memories, People, Architecture, Independence in 2006, Book of the Year, 16 Book of the Year. He researches on histories of art, architecture, settlements, urbanism, and landscape in Southeast Asia. He is a presently visiting professor at Xicheng University in Taiwan, and he will give us a presentation now on retracing footsteps, itinerant hawkers in Singapore. So please, you can give your presentation now. And you have, as I mentioned, up to 40 minutes for the presentation.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you everyone for joining this two-paper session. Early Singapore town developed on the southern edge of the island between two river systems, the Singapore River and the Rojo Kalang River system. At bottom left of the screen is a Singapore map from the 1820s, showing the two main areas of settlement between these rivers, early settlements, circled in dotted red lines. The predominant built form constructed was the shophouse type with shop spaces on the ground level and living spaces on the upper stories. Recessed 5-foot walkways along their front facades permitted formal entry into these shops, but also a pedestrian thoroughfare through the different roads and town districts. These urban elements, along with the streets in front of them, became backdrops to human activity and everyday life, including itinerant vendors of food and commodities. Food hawkers in the business districts in the 19th century Singapore served Asian workers in European and foreign companies who could not afford to dine at eating houses and restaurants in the town. With rapid immigration to the island for new opportunities by migrants from different Asian countries, the number of hawkers increased rapidly. Apart from those who simply carried their ware on their heads or with their hands as they plied through the streets, many would create stall counters which will be carried across a pole. After World War II, the three-wheeled type vehicle became popular. Others were able to work from semi-permanent locations. These would either be permitted by the municipality or more often than not illegally clustered together. By the turn of the 20th century, the proliferation of hawkers on city streets had already become a problem for two main reasons. 5-foot walkways and other public spaces were frequently congested by their presence and activities. The hygiene standards employed by hawkers were varied, and food waste and effluents were discharged into the streets and drains. This resulted in many instances of infectious diseases like cholera and typhoid. From 1903 onwards, municipal institutions became concerned enough to take action, beginning with hawker registration. Terry McKee and Yong Yue Man, who researched street hawkers in Southeast Asian cities, suggested that there were generally three ways to resolve the issues of hawkers in the cities: legislation, spatial control, or education. Firstly, hawkers could be controlled by legislating hawking laws and bylaws, and/or by issuing hawker licenses. Secondly, spaces where hawking takes place could be controlled with outright bans, limiting their operation at designated areas or times, or by building new spaces for them. Thirdly, hawkers could be educated or trained to enter other trades and thereby reduce their numbers. For Singapore, all three strategies were employed over a century of control and management of this hawker history. There are generally four phases commencing in 1908, leading to the eventual housing of all itinerant hawkers in markets and food centers, or more commonly by the seemingly oxymoronic term hawker centers. Phase one history started when Calcutta's chief health officer, W.J.R. Simpson, was invited to conduct the Singapore Sanitation Commission published in 1907. He was a believer that urban reform could achieve medical, moral, and social advancements, and suggested cutting back lanes into the shophouse blocks to improve sanitation and reduce risk of fire to buildings. A year later, on 11 September 1908, the Deputy President of the Municipal Council proposed that, I quote, shelter for hawkers, close quote, later called a hawker shelter, could also be simultaneously constructed at the emptied back lanes spaces that Simpson had proposed. The plans to construct one met with difficulty with the onset of World War I, but were advanced again when the occupation criteria of shelters was determined by William Middleton, the municipality health officer, for what was known as two basket hawkers of cooked food, those carrying loads across a pole. Uncooked food and sundry items were to be sold at markets, and all street side setups, legal or illegal, should be moved into shops and restaurants. 6 hawker shelters were constructed during phase one, beginning with a group of experimental shelters near the business district in 1921. That's number 1 on the screen. These were simple roof structures with fixed slots and an external fence, and hawkers were charged a nominal rent that included the use of electric light and water from standpipes. The first 4 were built to serve the 2 main congested town areas, with 2 more in the edges of the increasingly enlarging town area in 1929 and 1935, respectively. The Balestier Road Hawker Shelter, numbered 5 on the screen, is the only phase 1 shelter still existing, although it has undergone several renovations over time. The standout shelter in this group was at Queen Street, number 4, a 3-story municipal building with multiple functions, hawker stalls and other spaces at ground level, and dwellings and kitchens for conservancy coolies on the upper floors. The brick structure was finished with a plaster for its wall surfaces, and the ground floor laid with permanent tiles called Malacca tiles. Phase 2 of Singapore's hawker center history started with another report 5 years after World War II had concluded, when a large number of hawkers became a concern for the city once again. The report of the Hawkers Inquiry Commission of 1950 was ambivalent and stated that although the post-war influx of hawkers was a problem, it recommended a long-term policy to provide more proper shelters for these street traders, along with other methods of control. Phase 2 shelters were constructed along with the reconstruction of the post-war city. Markets and shelters were recommended for new housing estates designed by the Singapore Improvement Trust, the colonial housing agency. 2 of them have since developed into favorite eating haunts of Singaporeans today, Tiong Bahru Market, and as well as the Whampoa Food Center, opened in 1951 and 52 respectively. Besides these, those in housing estates, the colonial government constructed shelters as part of urban renewal. The horseshoe-shaped esplanade hawker shelter at Prince Elizabeth Walk, you see on the top, next to the Stamford Canal, was completed and opened to the public in 1951 and served, quote, Indian, Chinese, European, and Malay food, close quote, in 21 stalls. The transfer of the city abattoir from the city center made space available for the subsequent Bercia Food Center along a major urban thoroughfare. The third phase of hawker center history also corresponded with the process of nation building when Singapore became independent in 1965. There were 109 hawker centers constructed in this phase, comprising 3 types. The first group included those built by statutory boards to decongest the inner city, its periphery, and in the fast-growing Jurong Industrial Estate. The second and largest group was constructed by the Housing and Development Board, or HDB, at new public housing estates. A third group comprised those built near private housing estates and near public attractions and tourist locations. One of the first was the Newton Hawker Center, constructed in 1971 with, quote, hawker stalls in a garden setting, close quote, and designed with shade trees, hedges, and shrubs alongside a car park and public toilets. With its expensive housing program, the HDB constructed the bulk of these markets and hawker centers. During this transitional period, as more people moved into public housing, the HDB initiated 3 successful experimental schemes to allocate hawkers at designated hawker pitches at Kallang, Alexandra Hill, and Bukit Ho Swee public housing estates. A common parallel occurrence at this time was the temporary night market, or Pasar Malam, set up in the evenings along streets leading to these new public housing estates. Over 1.5 decades, hawker center design has also progressed from rudimentary sheds that you see bottom left, perhaps with to those with better architectural features, as can be seen at the example on the bottom right. The HDB accommodated the several types of hawkers in markets and food centers, which are usually constructed as connected entities, but separated by floor levels or transition spaces. Within a market, lock-up stalls to accommodate hawkers of dried foods and household items could be found adjacent to an area for wet market stalls. Phase 3 of hawker center history is characterized by stringent legislation and enforcement, with the hawkers now in their designated stalls. Laws including the Environmental Public Health Act of 1969, the Sale of Food Act in 1973 made hawking on the streets illegal. The power of enforcement was vested in multiple intergovernmental agencies, such as the Ministry of Environment, the Jurong Town Corporation, the Port of Singapore Authority, and the Housing and Development Board, as well as the Urban Redevelopment Authority. A demerit point system and inspection record books for stallholders were introduced to act against offenses such as littering, unhygienic practices, obstruction of common areas, and illegal extensions. A grading system of A, B, C, or D was introduced in 1997, and these alphabets need to be displayed at prominent stall locations. But if you ask Singaporeans, when you have a stall with an A, it doesn't mean that it's serving the best food. As non-air conditioned spaces, hawker centers in Singapore are designed as good utilitarian tropical buildings to respond to the hot and humid conditions of Singapore climate. Building elements moderate climate at all times for users within structures through passive design. Roof ceilings are high so that hot air may rise, and partitions and walls are positioned not to obstruct natural ventilation. Rainwater is directed away from the roofs, and wall surfaces into periphery drains and into the main drainage system. The hawker center is a highly serviced space. Ducts are designed over cooking areas of the stalls to help extract fumes and heat. Fans are attached to columns and between stalls to cool the sitting areas. To intercept grease and solids before they enter the wastewater system, grease traps are built underneath the floor surfaces. Toilets are also well placed and manned to ensure cleanliness, while designated washing areas allow patrons to wash and rinse at common areas. From its development from as a hawker shelter to that of a hawker center, the role of food centers has changed from its early function of solving sanitation and congestion problems. Besides food provision, the hawker center now serves as an important space for the government or for the Singapore government to communicate with the public as it was visited by a large cross-section of the people and to some extent influence social behavior. Government campaigns were conducted using its spaces, such as the Speak Mandarin campaign and the National Courtesy campaign in 1979. Posters, stickers, and other material were used in the hawker centers and related activities organized. This role was continued over the decades and included a range of campaigns such as the promotion of healthy lifestyles, awareness against food waste, and advice against outbreaks like the SARS crisis in 2003 and the present COVID-19 virus crisis from 2020 onwards. Visitors to hawker centers now include tourists who have been recommended to do so through travel guides and social media. Foreign dignitaries and celebrity chefs have visited them when on tour in Singapore. The hawker centers are also on the itineraries for ministers and minister walkabouts and used as a space for rallying support come political elections. The Michelin Singapore Guide included 2 hawker stalls in their 2016 listing, and the government was able to nominate and attain a UNESCO inscription for hawker culture as an intangible cultural heritage in December 2020. The key characteristics cited for the inscription include the fact that the hawker center served as community dining spaces for its diverse ethnic groups and as a reflection of its multicultural society at the egalitarian level. It is at such a space that a local of a particular ethnicity might first venture to sample the cuisine of another. After a hiatus of 25 years, of not building hawker centers after phase 3, the government decided to commence a phase 4 of hawker center construction in 2011. The jury is still out on the success of the ongoing phase 4 with an experimental social enterprise hawker center model incorporating architecture with a capital A. The lack of younger hawkers to take over from retiring ones was already a concern, along with rising operation costs. But this was exacerbated by the advent of the COVID-19 pandemic. We can only wait and observe what fate lies ahead for such a controlled but essential space type in Singapore. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sika, for your presentation.
Can I stop share?
Yeah, you can stop sharing unless when asked about a certain slide, but you can stop sharing.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, this was a good example actually showing how urban planning shape how people interact and when and how people interact with the space and public space. And this was clearly demonstrated through how you showed that legislation, special control, and education changed the situation of or the hackers' activities from problematic situation into a productive community and actually a heritage, a local heritage, and even I think it's applied to be a UNESCO World Heritage, the community, the hawker communities. Okay, so I will open the floor for questions. And I see that Adnia has a question, so you can start.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. Can you speak more about how the pandemic has impacted the hawker center's attendance in Singapore? And related to that, seeing that it was also health-related concerns that transformed the itinerant hawkers into a more permanent centralized shelters in the first place, do you expect to see any return to the more decentralized itinerant pop-up versions of hawking in the future in the interest of maybe managing such contagious airborne disease? Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. Yes, I think these are indeed important things to discuss, because the original intention is to map this the different phases out, because prior scholarship had been uneven, even for people like Brenda Yeo and Lily Kong, right, who wrote about this, but they seem to suggest sometimes that they start from 1950 onwards, and sometimes for colonial, as a sort of imposition on the Asian populations. But if we look more closely, there is a kind of ambivalent response, right? On the one hand, that it's a problem, you need to sort of exercise a lot of control. On the other, it's an important necessity. And so how does this then translate into actual designated spaces for these hawkers? I mean, in Singapore, this has sort of been so-called a success, because it's been able to transfer all of them there. So the interesting thing about hawkers, of course, as you know, since you researched this, is the itinerant, right? And the COVID-19 pandemic has made this not possible, right? Not for the hawkers themselves to operate within the centers, but for people who are now afraid to even sort of sometimes venture from their homes to buy food or to have food from the hawker stalls. So the interesting thing, of course, is that there has been a lot of Grab Food, Food Panda, all these kinds of delivery systems that suddenly become very popular, as you can imagine. But this in a sense has made the itinerant part of hawkers somewhat unnecessary. But of course, there's a price to pay, because the delivery persons have to be paid through their companies, and it also acts as it becomes an overhead for the hawkers themselves, who are charged about somewhere between 20 to 30%, right, for the delivery charge. So it has made this. So to answer, going back to your first question, this has impacted them, on the cost of the items. And also at the time when, because the supply chains are not so easy to continue from previous formats, these have to be sort of changed. But the biggest problem, of course, is the actual physical space itself is being cordoned off, right? Because it was kind of a rather open space, right? The great thing about it was that you could just walk in, you could buy your food, and then you can walk out. You have your food in the center. It's I noted the fact that it's actually a tropical architecture, but nobody talks about it as tropical architecture. So with the COVID-19, you have to control the entrance and exits. So everything now, from an open space, is now become much more regulated. The seating as well, right? Because they don't have plastic shields to separate patrons, but they have they tape crosses on seats and on the table. So you could only sit, say, for example, for a table of 4 persons, you could now sit 2 persons, diagonally across. And of course, then there's a restriction. So a lot of the hawkers now try to only operate on days that they able to get many customers, or they think they can get many customers. But of course, you know, the prolonged pandemic has also caused a lot of stores to close, right? This is kind of inevitable, right? You prepare a lot of food in the morning, and then it's not sold, and it eats into your operating costs and profits. So the sad thing, of course, is at the same time as Singapore has attained UNESCO status for intangible heritage for hawker center culture. The hawkers themselves, right, and the culture itself is under threat. I'm sure this is not just in Singapore, but across different areas, different countries, and different cities in the world. But in Singapore, this has been there has been a sort of a very damaging effect on this hawker culture, and we don't know how long it can be sustained. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you. Definitely. Just want to follow up shortly. Yeah, I do wonder that the stalls that have closed down will eventually create space for new generation of hawkers. You know, something that previously Singapore is worried that there won't be a new generation of hawkers because the younger generation doesn't seem to be interested in it. Maybe that'll change in the future. It'd be interesting to follow.
No, the space that's opened up doesn't actually. It's not a cause and effect kind of thing, because already a lot of the retiring hawkers cannot find successors, right? I think some of them with very well-known sort of recipes and all that. Some of them can sell their recipes to I know sometimes corporations, you know, that would buy them over and take over the business. But by and large, there are so many, hundreds and thousands of hawkers who actually cannot find successors. But there are incentive schemes that the government has come up with. I personally feel that they're not enough, but they're trying to sort of cultivate, and try to get younger hawkers to come into the fray. By giving them incentives, by conducting courses, right? Inviting more experienced hawkers to teach the craft, if the hawker is willing, to the younger hawkers, and then of course, and the interesting thing, of course, is that from the traditional sort of fare that you can find in the hawker centers, you can actually now it's now becoming quite cosmopolitan, right? So Singapore has so-called 3 big ethnic groups of Chinese, Malays, and Indians and Eurasians. So you would think that the food is of those types, but increasingly you can find, of course, Western food is already here, Japanese food, Korean food, Sri Lankan food, and now I've even found a stall selling Costa Rican food. So, so the interesting thing is that because of this cosmopolitan nature of Singapore, perhaps that some of the people are also, becoming interested in serving these kinds of food. So the culture is definitely changing into what we do not know, and hopefully, people can be let in, because right now only 2 persons can sit at the table, which is actually quite ridiculous, because they allow 5 persons to sit in a restaurant, which is enclosed. But the hawker center is, more by and large a naturally vented open space. There's mechanical ventilation, and yet, these kinds of regulations don't make sense, right? But we'll see what happens.
Thank you, Sika. We have 3 questions now. One from Roy and Clara and Montira. And I think Roy was the first, and then we will take Montira, then Clara.
Hi, everybody, and thank you for the great presentation. Thank you, Chi. Especially that last slide was really suggestive. I'm really hungry now after that last slide. It was really nice.
I was not planted by the tourism board to get you guys to come to Singapore, but hopefully you'll come.
I hope to give you some money though after that slide. But I understood. I have kind of a two-part question, maybe. So I understood your presentation as a very interesting history of how the hawkers were disciplined or integrated into a modern managerial city system with a centralized bureaucratic government trying to control various aspects of street life. And it seemed that your presentation is also very positive in the sense that at some point, and it was very interesting to start in the colonial period with the solution to concentrate hawkers in these hawker centers. So at some point, this became a solution, and we're still within that model. So we're still trying to concentrate hawkers in these hawker centers in a certain sense. And your presentation is saying that even though this was a discipline exercise, so this was somehow forced and coerced, I imagine, at some point, it's thrived, right? And I got the feeling that there's a parallel history or a simultaneous history of the pushback hawkers possibly exercised over this long attempt to integrate them in the city. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that pushback and how politicized that pushback is. Namely, when the issue of nationality starts appearing, so how is that, mixed within the claims of the hawkers themselves? So that's one part. The other part has to do with this hawker shelter solution. So it's a bit of a naive question, but was there any point in the history of Singapore where architects or some other agents, spatial agents, thought that what should happen is that the cities should adapt itself to the hawkers instead of trying to concentrate the hawkers in certain spots? And I'm thinking of a weird example in Chandigarh, for instance. 10 years ago, I have to say, I was at 10 years ago, so I don't know how it is today. But the Chandigarh was planned with the Corbu plan, right? So it had these huge modernist wide streets. And when I was there, the vendors, the hawkers, just were amazing, and they occupied these whole streets, and they didn't seem to be a bother to anybody because the streets were so wide, and they had these huge arcades, So I was thinking of that example. I was thinking is that at some point was there another architectural solution or proposition to let the hawkers thrive? Thank you.
Thank you, Rui, for the questions. Those are very important questions. I think, I kind of calmly spell out the kind of bureaucratic disciplinary aspects of the whole exercise, as you can see. Originally, of course, as I mentioned, people like Brenda Yeo, they suggest that there's a lot of colonial sort of action on the local public, and then the local public kind of resist. There's some kind of resistance and all that. I think there is the resistance, but by and large, if and of course, I think if you only look at one side, but not through sort of I sort of try to go into the municipal reports, and the municipality wasn't all from the European colonizers. Not that they also comprised local legislators who also sort of were trying to so-called protect the interests of locals, albeit they were sort of like rich people who an English educator who get into the municipality, but there were local legislators within the municipality itself. So even from the very early days of the colonial era, before World War I, there is a kind of ambivalence. Like on the one hand, and I talk about this. On the one hand, you can't just ignore the hawkers, right? Especially when a lot of immigrants, when they come here, if they have no skills, but they can create affordable meals for quayside workers, office workers, the Asian sort of workers who can't afford to dine in eating houses, restaurants. So there is always this trend of being ambivalent, right? On the one hand, you want to control them. On the other, there is this this service that they provide of food. And interestingly, in Singapore, I think and of course, the crucial point was in phase 3, when all of these regulations suddenly became quite manifested and accompanied by police action. So the environment officers would be accompanied by police and all that. So they would be gotten off the streets. And of course, there is a lot of reaction at the time, right? And that's why the police had to be there. And of course, there's a lot of resentment because something that and because now they have to pay for this and all that, and they are all surveyed. There's a lot of surveillance, right? There's a lot of regulations and all that. But the primary provision of food carried on, and in a very strange way, right? If you ask most Singaporeans now, right, after one century of this kind of change, they're quite happy to have a meal at these hawker centers, and of course, yeah, and it's also part of. I mean, there is now a lot of variety, and they're all over the island. So they have consciously placed these kinds of markets and food centers in the different neighborhoods of a public housing estate. Downtown, where you have the tourist attractions, and even in private housing estates, or along beach sides and all that. So it's actually quite accessible, right? Singapore is a very small island. We have 114 right now. So that actually and over time, some of them, like the old ones at Tiong Bahru and Wompo, right? Those have become sort of like very famous for certain kinds of food and so on and so forth. So it's developed a different kind of sort of ecosystem by itself. But the nature itself has changed, right? It's become the place where there is a certain kind of racial quota for the different kind of stalls, but and the separation of, say, halal food areas to with the non-halal areas. But these are now sort of actually quite positive, because even for myself and a lot of friends, if I'm Chinese, you would go there and eat and Chinese food, and a lot of families like myself, have sort of don't really eat food from prepared by other ethnic groups, even famous ones, until you go to their houses or during festivals. So this possibility of having having food across different ethnic groups is something that can take place in hawker centers like these, right? Because hawkers themselves, right, when they were applying the streets, they would go to their constituent patrons, right? So if you sold halal food, right, but perhaps you would go to a place where you think that there would be a lot of customers. But in the hawker centers themselves, that at least they are sort of made available. So in terms of I think there was the pushback that you're talking about. I think there's a resistance to the system, and somehow, right, they comply and all that, and found that even in their sort of a reduced capacity, they are still able to operate. And at the end of the day, the hawker center is still providing the most affordable meals, right? Because now there are also different kinds of food establishments. There's a coffee shop. There is the food court, which is the kind of air-conditioned space in the commercial areas, and then you have restaurants and so on and so forth. So that it still remains the sort of a cheapest alternative, right? If you want to have a simple meal in Singapore. For your second question, I think there were different groups of architects that were involved, and so in fact, when architects are involved, it may not necessarily be a good thing. When they start out as very plain shelters and all that, they are designed to take care of the rudimentary things, right? To make sure that the grease, right, is filtered and not causing problems into the main sewage systems. And then you have ventilation. Otherwise, no one's going to be sitting in there in a kind of uncomfortable space. So in fact, they just do the bare minimum, right, to cut down the glare, of sunlight and things like that. So the architects that are mainly have been designing these are from the public sector, right? So from the Urban Redevelopment Authority, they will design something to attract tourists, for example, or the Housing Development Board who would design these utilitarian structures. And after phase 3, right, in 1985, they stopped building hawker centers completely, right? And only in 2011, that's 25 years after building the third phase 3 hawker centers, they've started to build the hawker centers again. And this time round, they say, hey, it's a good idea to ask, architects to come in and bid for the job and all that. And the architects come up with, a lot of, details, additional details, planting that, add to a lot of the operating costs of these, which of course then go back to the hawkers themselves, because there's also a privatization process that's going on, where they have you have companies coming in to manage it instead of the of government agencies before that, who would not be sort of become middlemen and charging middlemen fees, right, to run this whole place, right, to keep the plants there, to have paint, get it repainted now and again. So architects have come in, private architects, and in fact, but throughout, I think there were some architects who can see their basic value as utilitarian structures, but there are also now architects coming and trying to design architecture with a capital A. Right? That's what I've indicated. Right? I hope that answers the question, but we can talk further. Yeah.
I want to
thank
defer to Clara first. She had her hand up before me.
Sorry, I didn't notice the difference in colors. This is why I thought your color was a little bit darker, but thank you for letting Clara speak first. Oh, we can't hear you, Clara.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so thank you, Professor Tikian, for a presentation. I am now working on my dissertation related to how Indonesian immigrants in the United States making their place, making the sense of home back as Indonesian through food consumption. So I mean, this is very interesting presentation. So I want to try to explain a little bit what I understand from your presentation and then deliver the question. So what I understand from your presentation is first, at the very first phase of the emergence of the hawkers, they were feeding the migrants as an affordable options, and then also familiar food. And then I assume this is multicultural, because what I know from your presentation, there are some Indian, Malaysian, Chinese people in Singapore. And then from what I studied now, food always related to identity of some ethnic groups, and also like they are always some spatial expressions that they show from the food consumption itself. So when you showed that the government tried to centralize all of the hawkers from the street into one building, like I saw a kind of dramatic transformation from the hawkers from your photos at the very beginning of the slides, and then turn into like one building with like everything's just crammed into this kind of like singular type of building, and they just like losing all of the spatial characters that they show on the street. So then it's becoming tourist destination, although it's like crammed into one building. And then I don't know if you are agree with my opinion, but it's looking like the government producing some kind of or aiming for engineered cultural expression here, what I see from the transformation. I don't know what you take on that. And then, so my question is actually related to the intangible heritage UNESCO has given to the hawker phenomena in Singapore. what is your take about the spatial expression actually related to the ethnic identity that is now from the previous question? You said even now richer because more and more food is coming in, not only from Asia, but also like Costa Rican, for example, and how this kind this like fusions of food actually can not only bringing the taste, but also enriching the cultural aspect of the architecture or the urban, you know, like the urbanism in architecture. Yeah, so I think that's my question. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Clara, for the question. Yeah, I'm trying to present this, and of course, you know, there is some attention to Singapore getting this inscription on the UNESCO's intangible cultural heritage list, right? But I think that my task, right, that I set myself was really to sort of map this whole journey out, because there has been a lot of different kinds of representations about what hawker centers are. And of course, as you rightly point out, you know, the identity with food and the sort of ethnicity or kind of groups or different kinds of groups is a kind of something that's going on. But in the case of Singapore, I think there are two two major views. And one is that, oh, you know, we must protect certain kind of food, that it must be pure, it must you know, it must say something about the skills of a particular group. Then of course there are people like me who say, oh, well, you know, if you have fusion food, I mean, as with buildings, all the traditions change. I mean, traditions change, and even from the colonial days, there's been a lot of intermixing of ideas, right? You know, the use of noodles. I think if you come to Singapore and, you know, you try the mee goreng here, I mean, you know, that has some sort of elements that's taken from different ethnic groups. Then of course now you have halal chicken rice, or halal bak kut teh, right, which is the kind of originally a pork dish. So and you know, you have roti canai, roti prata, which now has, you know, kind of very internationalized. You can have cheese with with that dish and all that. So I think there's kind of fusion going on, and I think that's to me, I think it's just a natural progression, and also say something about what's going on in that place. So if I totally welcome, you know, stalls selling Costa Rican food, right? And you know, my initial research is in Indonesia. I look for all the Indonesian foods in Thai. I mean, I eat across different cultures. So I think you rightly point out that it's an expression of what you know, what the space is about, right? As much as, you know, if you look at the warungs in Indonesia, and why have they remained as warungs, say something about the kind of policy. So in Singapore, the mantra is that, you know, you need to have this kind of control. You need to have this kind of sanitation, and what I'm trying to show is that, you know, that kind of control, right, has its roots all the way back to the 1900s, right? It's not just a Singapore government kind of thing, but, you know, even during the colonial era, there is this commencement of this various levels of control, and that has then be linked with you know, what the streetscape is, the urban life patterns and all that. That has an impact. So it does have a lot of connections, but in my case, I'm thinking that we can look at it further, and we can find out more about what the country is, right? And of course, you know, for myself, I always lament that there are no hawkers in Singapore, like, because I travel to Manila, I travel to Bangkok, and I look for the hawker food. But in Singapore, perhaps, right? I mean, they still call it hawker center. It's an oxymoron. You know, how can you have hawkers, you know, who are supposed to be itinerant, and then you say it's a center? But that's what people call it, and partly I think the reason is because it was called a hawker shelter before, and then during the transition, it just carried over. Although food center is the correct term.
Oh, Mais,
Yeah.
can I have a follow-up?
Yeah, sure.
So, Prof. Chicken, when you say the architect is some of them lately getting involved, is that like there is a cultural consideration to relate the design to the like specific ethnic identity to just relate the food with the spatial experience?
Yeah, those have been tried out. Some more successful than others, but so they try to design sort of with Malay motifs and all that in a predominantly more Malay area, like in Geylang. And then of course they tried out kind of different things. I mean, the architecture itself, of course, is interesting to examine. What kinds of facade they use, what kind of forms they try to mutate for the hawker center itself. But fortunately, by and large, right, my opinion is that those phase 3 and before, those are designed as pretty utilitarian structures, but they serve to create comfort within the hawker centers themselves, which I think is the right thing to do, right, to provide that space.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we have 5 minutes almost for the last question from Mutira.
Okay, thanks. Hi, Chiken. I have 2 questions. First question is about your last slide. Did you take all those photos? Because the composition of all the plates are very similar, and the orientation of the chopsticks is almost exact. That's
yeah. Those are what I ate.
Okay, that's what I thought. Okay, yeah. So now we know sort of your eating journey. But I have a second, slightly more serious question, which is people, like in highly sanitized environments, people are always looking to find the outcasts or the kind of the counter narratives to that. Are there pockets where there are still more informal or less regulated forms of eating and vending? For instance, like in like migrant housing neighborhoods or compounds, in those areas, do the authorities turn a blind eye on regulating things like hygiene of food and safety standards, or is it actually the opposite, where it's even more regulated, especially since the whole COVID, migrant worker kind of issues?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I've not really started to work on this, but from what I know, there are sort of hawkers that have been given entry into migrant dormitories, and and some of them, of course, have self-organized into making food for particular ethnicities. And incidentally, the migrant migrant worker population is actually quite diverse as well, right? Because you have people from northern China, you have people from different parts of China. You have from South Asia, and even for South Asia, they have different groups. I mean, there is a space in Singapore near Serangoon Road, right, where they are allowed to mix during Sundays when there was no COVID. And my student and I, we did a search, and the space itself has become kind of divided into the different cities where they come from India. So that there is a great diversity. So and they sometimes self-organize, and sometimes they would also arrange, and some of the more entrepreneurial ones, they will cook food, right? And then they try to find a way to bring it into the migrant dormitory. So there is some control, and as long as you can get past the gate, and as long as there's no outbreak of disease and all that resulting from the food, then I think usually no one's going to question, and things will be allowed to stay as it is. As it's a kind of a reactionary thing, right? I think they close one eye, as you say, But when something happens, then obviously they have to make some kind of representation to the wider world that, oh, we do not condone this and blah blah blah. We maintain the higher standards, and I think the times have changed, and there is also an understanding of an increasing dependency on these migrant workers, and that a section of the population also tend to think that the conditions that they live in, they have to improve, along with the other sort of social provisions and remittance forms and all that need to change as well. But to answer that question, yes, there are sort of hawkers that also tend to try to sell to these very, very particular groups. Incidentally, the pictures look the same because there is also a restriction on the use of melamine ware. Those things that you see so they're sort of standardized, right? And they're sort of color coded for the different stores and all that. And so those are sort of used because I think for the ease of cleaning, and it's all leading to cleanliness and maintenance and things like that. So they have part of the interesting thing is for me to take those photographs is to try to the table has a certain color and the plates have a certain color, so they look pretty consistent when you put them all together. But the message of that thing was the different. I mean, even with rice and even with noodles, you can sort of create this whole palette, right? That's used across the different ethnic groups.
Okay, thank you. So we're almost running out of time. Actually, I wanted to ask one question, but maybe this is just you didn't have to answer because we didn't have enough time. But I wanted to ask how prepared the hackers are for the future, and in light of changes in the horizon. So how do you see their future? Where is it going? So if you in 1 minute you can.
Okay. The short answer is that the government is trying, but it's not enough, and it's always lagging behind with actual situations going on. I mean, they've given them some subsidies and packages to tide them over, but it's definitely not enough. And they're still allowing the food transport companies to charge them and not make websites available for them, because everybody now orders on the web, and the more elderly workers are not able to do, they don't have any online platforms to advertise the food and all that. And these are the ones that are most at risk. And if they are not, if they are not sort of like super popular with the crowd and featured on the online or featured elsewhere, they tend to then suffer, and then they will have to close shop. So they're adversely affected. There are some measures. But it's not enough, and it's at risk, right? The National Heritage Board, as I was saying, now have to step up, right, and to say if you want to keep this name of, oh, we have this intangible heritage culture sanctioned by UNESCO, you have to do something. But the Heritage Board is not doing, right? They're just basking in the glory, right? I hope this video doesn't get to them.
No, thank you very much. This was a good answer. I mean, I got the answer for my question. And of course, we would like to hear more from you, but we're running out of time now. Actually, we're exactly on time.
I mean, we really have a luxury of a 1 hour presentation.
Yeah, it turned to be a good thing. So thank you very much. Thank you, Yeling Lin and Shikrin, for your presentations, and it was very informative. And thank you, all participants, for your questions and for the discussion we had in our presentations. So enjoy your break now, and enjoy the sessions after that. Thank you very much.